Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is going to be a brief little discussion video on Psychopaths, episodes 2 and 3. I've been really excited watching this series, and I haven't seen a lot of people actually talking about it. And it's one of those series where I feel like it's slowly building to something spectacular, much akin to certain series like Ghost in the Shell, which is one of the mirrors very closely as far as style and the way they tell their stories, as far as I'm concerned. And I just really love this series, and I want to be able to talk about it without actually going into full-on in-depth reviews. Now, with episode 2, I really felt like the whole crux of that episode was exploring Akane, the main character, having this new job with the Enforcers, and really feeling a sense of self-doubt. Like, she didn't know if she actually picked the right job out of all the qualifications she had, and basically the list of jobs she had to choose from. And she just sort of goes one by one, feeling people out, talking to people like Tomomi, and others, while she's on the job to kind of get a sense of whether this is the right place for her. Because as we saw, at the end of episode 1, there was that conflict with her and Shinya, and she ended up shooting him with a paralyzer. And so she's really begun calling it into question whether this is the placement that she would fit best. And we see her asking her friends and, as I say, the other enforcers. It's not until she actually confronts Shinya himself, the conversation, sort of emboldens her and makes her realize this is where I need to be. This is kind of, this whole little team needs a human quotient, somebody to actually question orders instead of just jumping at them like the enforcers seem to do under their mutual boss, Genoza. And so I really thought this was an intriguing story, and it's backed by just a really phenomenal world that this is set in, with all this technology that is really awesome. I mean, she had a little jellyfish sort of AI that used holographics to make her apartment appear to be whatever she wanted it to be, and she could choose basically every time she wakes up in the morning whatever she wants, and I just love the depth that this series puts forth. Now in episode 3, I really felt like the crux shifted to a degree, because now we see Akane sort of coming into her own. She's basically standing up to Genoza when he says, you enforcers don't know what you're talking about. They're investigating this murder by dismemberment in this business, basically something along the lines of you might see in Ghost in the Shell, where robots kind of attacked people. And the enforcers suspect it's murder, whereas Genoza doesn't feel like there's enough to base it on, because as it happens, all the workers in this place, they're in lockdown, they're basically held there 24 hours a day, and all of their criminal coefficients seem to be relatively low. But of course, you have Shinya, you have the other enforcers, Tomomi and such, basically feeling like they know what's going on. There has been murders going on in this business, and you see Akane stepping up to Genoza and basically saying, I got to put my trust in these guys. I don't think you're seeing them clearly enough that they can actually do a good job. And it's fascinating to me that Genoza's like, you know what, fine, go ahead. You're going to be a fool. You're going to stumble into all kinds of problems, go ahead. Let's see you blunder into it and find out for yourself that my stance is the correct one, that we have to sort of, treat these enforcers like the dogs that they are. And it's just a very interesting situation that plays out when basically Shinya lives up to the expectations that Genoza might have had, but Akane wouldn't have had, in that he hounds the guy they believe to be the murderer, and he just does it in a maniacal way to bring out the worst in this guy, because that's exactly what he's meant to do. That's what these enforcers are meant to do. Their criminal coefficients are very high, and they could snap at any moment. And I think what Genoza's worried about is pushing them over the edge and losing his enforcers, as opposed to actually finding the people who are committing these crimes. Akane finds out the hard way that Shinya is very much a dog to be tamed, in that he doesn't want to be, this for the rest of his life, but he's accepted this role. And there's some part of him, I think, that we see in this episode that actually kind of gets pleasure from dogging the murderer and getting the murderer to come out from hiding. And it's those psychological aspects of these characters that really, again, with this setting that is surrounding them, this very futuristic setting with all these great, fascinating technologies, the Dominators, the weapons that they use. We actually saw a new function in this episode, which basically vaporized the entire bellies of these machines that were trying trying to kill the enforcers and Akane as well. And I'm just completely taken by this series. And it's really the characters themselves as well that intrigue me, because you have Shinya, who is sort of the lead enforcer. He seems to be the one that is focused on the most story-wise, and he is just, to me, very reminiscent to Spike Spiegel of Cowboy Bebop. I basically said this in my first impressions video. You have a sequence that's sort of like a flash forward at the very beginning of the first episode, and it just feels like Spike going up against Vicious at the end of Cowboy Bebop. And the opening of episode 3 is very much reminiscent to that, because you have Shinya effectively shadow boxing, and he's by himself. He lights up a cigarette, and he goes over to this wall where there's this image that you don't really see clearly, but it looks like it's a guy with white hair. So there's that callback to that flash forward at the opening of episode 1, where he's going. You know, this is where he's headed. And I think it's very interesting because, again, while he looks and kind of acts like Spike, at the same time, he's a bit of a loose cannon, much more so than Spike would be. I mean, he does what he wants, but I think Shinya possesses a darker side that's more animal and more instinctual than Spike ever would, whereas Spike would be laid back. But I just love the fact that you have this perfect mesh of a Ghost in the Shell-like world and a character that's kind of reminiscent to Spike Spiegel, and that to me is just awesome. Of course, he's not the only character that's fascinating. Some of the other enforcers, which I'm hoping, because I think this is a 26-episode series, we're going to get to see them, you know, have their moment to shine and stuff like that. Tomomi has been the friendliest of the enforcers to Akane, and I love that he's got this very sort of old-school detective feel to him. You know, he feels like he's the guy who's been on the job for a while, and he knows the ropes, but at the same time, he's not in Akane's face and that kind of thing. He's more welcoming. And, you know, there's some comedic characters and some straight-laced characters and some strange characters. And, again, I haven't learned all their names as yet because it's still very early in the series. But, once again, these are just all multiple facets of what I'm finding fascinating with this show. And I'm hoping that, you know, by hearing this, you guys will be a little more taken by it and maybe check it out if you haven't already. And if you have, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below what you're thinking of Psycho Pass. Do you think it's building up to something spectacular like I think, or do you think it's just going to be a sort of typical anime series that'll be soon forgotten once it's done? So please post your thoughts in the comments below as usual, and otherwise it's going to be pretty much it for me on this one, so I'll catch you later. Peace.